Hello and welcome back to another Bible reading and discussion.
Romans.
Romans. We're going to just kind of take it chapter by chapter and see how long we go and where we end up. Because
We're committed to keeping it under 2 years.
yes, at least, if not more. We are not. I am not on. I am now on. So anyway, welcome.
I've been on.
You've been on. So hopefully they'll probably pick me up through your mic a
I
little
suspect.
bit. But what we're going to do is just kind of see where this goes. We don't want to turn it into a Romans podcast. We are still trying to stick with the Bible reading and discussion.
Overview, main things.
But because we are in control of our own path,
or not.
or not, I think there are some chapters we might slow down a little on.
I suspect.
You know, you start getting to chapter 3 and 4, and there are some things. Chapters 9,
Yeah.
you know, there's some
All
stuff.
that Calvinistic potential in there.
Yeah, and you know, it's okay for us to just kind of throw out what's out there. Let you just. But I think as you go through Romans the way we're going to go through it, you'll see the buildup.
Yeah, it's an argument he's developing.
Yeah, and if you sometimes people jump into chapter 9.
Don't do it.
And they try to figure out what chapter 9 is talking about without seeing what Paul's been doing through the first 8 chapters.
9 through 11 is pretty much a parenthesis.
Yeah.
You could take it out, and you'd still have the essence of Romans with the justification through faith and then application. But because there are problems that have developed and misunderstandings that have developed, he needs to chunk something in there.
Yeah. So Romans is probably, you know, Paul's thickest letter, heaviest, weightiest. It's probably what Peter was referencing, and you know,
some things hard to understand.
there are some things that are hard to understand.
Yeah.
Romans could be one of them.
It could just be.
But I think when you take the forest for the tree approach, it gets easier.
Yeah, if you understand his overview, then the parts fit in there as opposed to trying to do it the other way around.
Yeah, and some problems that you come in with is his usage of the word law. Is it law of Moses? Is it law in general? Is it both?
Is it
either
even
or?
more? Yeah.
Spirit. Sometimes spirit can be
A little S.
Is it little s, big S? Is it talking about our spirit, the spirit, our attitude? So we're going to have to
Context.
even flesh. People,
even flesh.
you know, the word flesh. So there's a lot of words he uses. And here's my take on when people are explaining the gospel.
What's your take?
So when you're going through different letters, different people explain the gospel differently to different people.
Yeah, the audience has needs. There's a difference between, for instance, in Acts 2 and Acts 17, between a Jewish in Jerusalem and a pagan in Athens. Same gospel, but you got to convey it so that the people will understand. I think it was Francis Schaeffer that says something to the effect that the simple gospel isn't simple until it's simple to the people you're telling it to.
I like that. Never actually heard that. Or I may have and just said,
Yeah,
you know,
stuff goes in and out.
feathered out. But he's speaking, you know, especially when you're in Rome. Rome is that's where the central laws are brought out, are delved out into you got your court system, you got all your high officials, you got Caesar. And so living in the city of Rome is probably where you're going to be most heavily influenced by the idea of, are you legally right? Are you legally
the
wrong?
forensics of it.
You know, the forensics of it. And so Paul is going to use justification and righteousness here more so than he will in other places. In other places, he doesn't use it at all.
Yeah, I know. It's like you say, what is the need of the moment for the understanding of the people you're dealing with? You could turn this into like a Perry Mason courtroom trial thing.
Yeah.
It's so forensic.
Yeah. And so we just need to understand that's what Paul's doing. And as we go, we'll explain some of this stuff, but we're just kind of giving you, if we were to outlining it, especially the first 4 chapters, to me, is the gospel encapsulated in the sense of he's kind of running you through Genesis. You know, first we're going to go through the Gentile world, and that's what you see for the first 11 chapters of Genesis is where does the world end up?
Sin.
Flood, you know. And then you kind of got Abraham's descendants, and that's kind of your chapter 2 and 3. Hey, you Jews,
And
he
guess
gave
what?
you a shot.
Everybody's in the same predicament.
And everybody really is in the same predicament, whether you're Jew or Gentile. We all fallen short of the glory of God. And Jesus then becomes the Savior not only for the Jew, maybe the Jew first, but also to the Gentile.
He has a phrase he uses in 3:21, but now. So he's just kind of, we go all the way through, here's where we're at, but now let's deal with Jesus and plug him in.
Yeah. And the idea of being justified, Jesus, what God's got to do, remember the covenant has been made, there was a covenant that was made. And so, but one of the unique things about what God did was he put Abraham to sleep, and he
took
walked through it alone.
Yes.
And so Romans to me is, especially the first 3 chapters, is explaining how can God justify man when we fell short, yet God says that he was going to take on both parties' responsibility. And since God is not a man, and Job recognizes this, since God is not a man, he recognized that our Redeemer must come down from heaven, and it must be God.
Insightful by Job.
Must be God himself.
Yes, he nailed it.
And so Romans 3 is really going to deal with why Jesus had to be God, had to be man, and how he becomes the justifier.
People will say sometimes that God could have done it another way. No, he couldn't.
Yeah.
This is the only way he could have done it in keeping with how he's revealed himself and how he set things up in the scriptures.
Yep. And another thing we're going to see here is a lot of times people come to Romans and they see Paul as bashing the law or really getting
Which
all over the
nothing
law.
could be further from the truth.
And what you're going to see is he actually, as we're going to see, puts it in its place.
Yes, I like
It
that.
has
Puts
a
it in its place.
It has a place.
He bashes taking it out of its place.
Yes.
He extols it in its place.
And so sometimes you got to realize is Paul will deal with how people used the law.
Yes, as opposed to the law's intent. And then sometimes he deals with the law's intent.
Because in chapter 10, you're going to see that the Jews, their problem was they thought the law was the end-all, be-all, and not that there was a goal to the law. There was an end to the law. And not necessarily an end in the sense of it was going to end, but in the sense it was pointing towards something.
Yeah, it gets fulfilled and continues in a more broad, universal form.
And, that form takes Jesus.
Indeed.
Jesus becomes the epitome of justification.
Judaism was never complete. It could never do the job. Never.
Yeah. So that is some things we need to consider, some things we're going to flesh out, and some things that you need, as you're reading this book, you need to see that Paul has a purpose.
He's very deliberate.
He's very deliberate. And sometimes he'll cycle. He'll come back to things.
Which is another interesting way about how Scripture works, broader than even this, is it cycles. So it's not like, it's kind of a...
Yeah, we like linear.
Yeah, we do. We're Westerners, aren't we?
They don't do linear well.
No.
So, want to jump in?
I'm jumping.
All right.
Paul, a bondservant of Christ Jesus, called as an apostle. Called is a big deal in a lot of things.
Yeah.
Set apart, holy, for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. So this Jesus thing had been anticipated and prophesied long before.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I really like what he's about to do here in these first 7 verses is we sometimes, when you hear preach the gospel, what do a lot of people mean?
Death, burial, and resurrection.
Or they mean the plan of salvation. Like
Yes.
A gospel sermon is our
How do you get
response.
saved?
How do you get saved? The gospel is not about how you get saved. It's about how salvation was brought into the world. And that's a distinction that we need to make. We need to make.
In 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4, which talks about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, which is good news, of course. But there are other ways that the gospel is used in the New Testament to talk about the broader expanse of the good news.
Everything that Jesus did and fulfilled is a part of the gospel.
It is.
Just the resurrection is the capstone.
It is.
But if all the stuff didn't happen beforehand,
we'd have no resurrection. And then we've got what follows it. So
Yes.
that's all part of the thing.
yes. And without the resurrection, the gospel fails. But without it's just it all
It's
goes
just
together.
interconnected.
Yeah.
It's amazing how it is. Which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures concerning his Son, who was born of a descent of David according to the flesh. So it's very Jewish there. Matthew works that in. He will get more universal later, and Luke does that more in his genealogy. But he is of the flesh. He is of the flesh coming through David.
Yeah, which is through Abraham, brings all the way back.
But there's more to the story. Who was declared the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead according to the Spirit of holiness. So he is of David, but he is of God.
Yeah, he is of God, and he was even raised by God. I think one of the things that is made clear is Jesus had the power to raise himself, but what he did, part of the gospel,
Leaves himself up.
he, being man, took on the man role for a second and left God to do the raising.
And he trusted him completely.
He trusted him, and that's what we ought to do.
Indeed it is.
Yeah.
Through whom we have received grace, John's prologue, grace upon grace, James realized through Jesus Christ. Unmerited favor we use is kind of bigger than that, but that's part of it. An apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith. This is an interesting thing because here in 1:5 and in 16:26, we find that his apostolic ministry was to serve obedience of faith.
Yeah, and so these are bookends. And so when he, in chapter 1, and as you said in chapter 16, he both says that the result of this letter ought to be the obedience of faith. So what you can take from that is every mention of faith in between these captains.
Yes.
Paul is assuming that you're going off his definition,
Yes.
that there is an active faith, there is an alive faith, there is an obedience that follows through faith. So when you go to like chapter 4 and chapter 9, and people walk away with this faith alone and their faith alone, I believe in faith alone if you have a proper
If you
definition.
understand what that means, yes.
But when it's a mere mental assent,
Yes.
belief,
Right.
you're missing. Paul's explained it to him.
He
And
does.
You can't take,
The Bible, I mean, Hebrews 11, you can't look at that and say it's a momentary thing. It's what you do with it. Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness is applied, we'll see in Romans, in various aspects of his life. So obedience of faith, James 2 is not in opposition to Paul.
Yeah.
Paul is talking about when we understand faith as a whole. James is talking about when you strip obedience away from it.
Yeah. Well, and even Romans 4, the idea that, even obedience of faith, we need to understand Romans 4 is going to further explain, it's not a meritorious thing.
No.
We didn't earn Jesus, we didn't earn grace, we didn't earn justification. Yet, the display of faith is what shows that it's real and that we've truly understood Jesus, what he's done, and that we're really following and discipling after him.
Exactly. When you're born into a family, you don't earn the privilege of being a child, but you are expected to live in a way that honors the fact that you are a child who has been benefited by your parents, and you will behave yourself accordingly. If you don't, you can forfeit your birthright.
Yes, and this fundamental flaw that I think some of us have, and at least the church in Rome had, it was causing a division between Jew and Gentile because they were using their inheritance, Jewish inheritance, as a superior, aspect over their Gentile brethren.
We see it in Acts with regard to circumcision, which is not overtly dealt with here, but that whole, we're Jews.
Yeah.
Okay, and you served a means to a bigger end. We're at the bigger end. Let's deal with it.
Yeah. Was Christ's likeness, obedience of faith is really displaying Christ's attributes in your life. Was it ever he was the Son of God, and he came and served. He was the Son of God, and he came
Washed
and
feet, all
saw
that
himself
stuff.
as more.
Got crucified.
Yeah.
To all who are beloved of God in Rome, called as saints, and saints are not a special suborder of Christianity. Every holy one is a set-apart person, is set apart because they have obeyed the gospel. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, because your faith is being proclaimed throughout the whole world, and Rome radiated.
Yeah.
So what they were doing was having an influence beyond itself. And this can and should be true of individuals and individual congregations, radiate beyond themselves and their sphere.
Well, and there's the saying, all roads lead to Rome, but also all roads lead out. So this is they could be a central pillar in the fact that there are people who are passing through Rome that no other congregation in all the world would be able to see and influence, but they will.
Yes.
And Paul, as we're like in Acts,
Yes.
this is written before the end of Acts. He's wanting to go to Rome. He's about to tell us, he wants to see these
He's
brethren.
been talking about it, praying
Because
about it.
he's looking to go beyond Rome
Yes,
into Spain.
Spain.
But Rome's got to be a central
Yeah.
place where he's got to carry through, and he needs them to do some work before he gets there.
Well, yes, he is he not? No, Paul's itinerary in the missionary journeys is largely population centers.
Yeah.
Because they had people coming in and they had people going out. That doesn't mean that other people don't deserve to hear the gospel, but that's a good way of making sure everybody does at the get-go.
And this is one of the few churches that he writes to, like Colossae, that he actually didn't establish.
Didn't actually go there. But he knows the deal because there's a centrality and a oneness to Christianity.
Absolutely.
Is my witness as to how unceasingly I make mention of you. And he prayed for people all the time like this. Always in my prayers making requests, if perhaps now at last by the will of God I may succeed in coming to you. And all the while God working behind the scenes to get him there. And he has no clue how that's going to work out, but it will.
Come in chains.
For I long to see you so that I may impart some spiritual gift to you that you may be established. This is an interesting idea. I'll give you my take and you can tell me if you disagree or not, and then we'll move on. I think as an apostle, he can do things for a church like they called to Samaria, so, to lay hands and get them further along in their growth in that. And so he as an apostle is especially wanting to be there to do what only an apostle can do in that sense.
Yeah, and here's the fact that he's coming to do this, and I agree, throwing that out there.
I guess we can continue on there.
That's why, like in Romans 12, he's wanting them to foster, I don't believe Romans 12 is spiritual gifts.
Yeah.
In the sense of miraculous.
What are your
giftedness?
You have a personality. You have some people are better speakers. Some people are better whatever.
Yeah.
Everybody's got something that their physicality suits them for better.
Yeah, and he says, I will foster that. The spiritual gift will help more with their theological and their understanding of the gospel. But that doesn't necessarily, as we learn in Corinthians, help them in their practical application of loving others and serving others.
They can misunderstand that and not see it as a fostering of the content of the gospel and approving that it is from God.
Yeah.
And they take it personally.
So many of these Christians, remember, they were probably converted in Acts because they were members. There were Jews who came in and were converted. There was Roman Jews there, and so probably some of them were the ones who were converted and went back to Rome. But they may not have they brought some gifts with them.
But they couldn't lay hands.
They couldn't lay hands and pass them on themselves.
Yeah. That is, that I may be encouraged together with you while among you, each of us by the other's faith. So I think that's pretty neat. An apostle looks to the rank and file as an encourager. Both yours and mine. I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that often I have planned to come to you and have been prevented so far, so that I may attain some fruit among you also, even as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation, and as an apostle, he has a special obligation. In some sense, we all have a sort of an obligation. We can't just sit around and do nothing. Both to Greeks and to barbarians, to the wise and the foolish. 1 Corinthians gets into a thing about foolishness and wisdom, and the Greek world, and Rome has kind of incorporated that, thinks they're so smart.
Yeah.
And Paul says they're actually foolish, but I'm still going to help them to see what wisdom is.
It was funny with the Greeks because, they were the philosophers of the time. They sat around and literally tried to explain the world.
Oh, yeah. When Paul gets a hearing on Areopagus, we like to hear new things. They're not really wanting to change their lives or anything. They just like to muse about stuff.
And that's what that's what this letter does really well. It starts off with your fundamental theological aspect of who God is, what he's done, who Jesus is, what he's done. But if that doesn't change the very nature of who you are, all of what Jesus did is useless for you if you don't become more like Jesus as a result.
It's not some sacramental type of thing where you do something that has intrinsic power and you get to, like, doing a cross to a vampire or something. No, it's just it's internalizing.
And we get to chapter 5.
We need a vampire movie where somebody bites a Christian and they just disappear because it's got Jesus in them. Think about it. So for my part, I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also in Rome. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel. As a Jew, he faced a lot of opposition. He's not ashamed. Yeah. For it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. And believes is not a static, one-time thing. Can't be.
Well, he's going to explain belief. He's going to go through and show that belief results in a trust, which results in a lifestyle, which is you completely humble yourself, understanding that we are all of Adam, as he's going to explain later, but that there's no sin, that Jesus, who is the new Adam, and he brings grace, cannot forgive. But, as he says, shall we sin so the grace may abound? May it never be. Those who are baptized into Christ, we've been dead, right? We died to the old man.
Yeah, crucified. My late good friend Johnny Ramsey used to talk about there is security for the believer, and believer is obedience of faith, walking in the light.
Yeah.
Yes, there is security. We don't have to cower in fear, and we don't have to worry about, did I miss something before I went to bed and prayed? If we're walking in the light, there is security for the person that the Bible identifies as a believer.
Yeah, and you know what, and different people define what walking in the light is, and what that means. And some people go way too far, meaning it's absolute perfection, right? And some people go, well, you don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
But it's just...
But a walk's a walk.
A walk is a walk. It's being sanctified. It's walking in the ways of Jesus, following his footsteps. And as you're growing, the idea that you have to grow and mature means that there are imperfections. So it's not about a perfect walk.
Yes. And you die, you're not completely done.
Yeah.
I suspect you were not a perfect child. Neither was I.
Well,
I don't have perfect children, and neither do you. But we're not kicking people out necessarily because of their imperfections, because it's a process. If we, I think you mentioned this Sunday or recently, if God can give good, when our children ask us for a fish, we don't give them a snake.
No.
They ask us for bread, we don't throw a rock at them. If we don't do that,
and we're imperfect,
then God's not. Yeah, we're imperfect. God's there for us if we give him a chance.
Yeah, I think, some of our brethren go a little too far in the sense of they think it's almost like a daily in and out of God's grace.
Yeah, in and out, in and out.
I think it is a decision to walk out, to sin willfully. There is a point in which everyone knows you can walk high-handed, you have walked away from God. But as you said, there is eternal security. Right, and I think that's what we miss because sometimes we fight against.
We're so busy worrying about
perseverance of the saints. We fight against that. That we go so far in the fact that you can never really know then, because it's all on your goodness. If you are going to heaven based on your goodness and how good of a boy you've been, you've missed really what belief means, because belief in the gospel is that Jesus' blood saves because we couldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
If there's nothing we could do to save ourselves, there's nothing we could continue to do to keep us saved. We need Jesus' blood.
I'm going to try something that is a challenge to a person with
right.
dyslexia, such as myself. I heard it said that some of our religious friends believe you cannot fall from grace but live as if you could. And we believe you can and live as if you can't.
I like that.
Okay, I did it. I'm moving on. I'm not.
That may be an overgeneralization, but
well, it is. It's a hyperbole for purposes of illustration. Don't hate me. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it, the righteousness of God, that's the gospel, is revealed from faith to faith. Interesting phrase. As it is written, going back to the Old Testament, like he said, it was talked about. But the righteous man shall live by faith. Habakkuk there.
Yeah.
And this is one of his big verses. The other is Genesis 15:6.
Yeah.
Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. But from faith to faith, that's an interesting phrase. It's subject to interpretation, but it's here. What do you think?
I think he's talking necessarily revealed from faith to faith. I think he's talking about a system of faith.
I agree. It's always been that way. This isn't something new.
Yeah.
It's always been this way.
Yeah.
And in fact, Habakkuk boldly
the fact that
says
he quotes Habakkuk, even under the Old Testament, the same faith they needed, in the fact that they needed to learn. One of the things Paul does learn in this, that he says he learns in this letter, is that the law was always intended to get me to understand how much I need a Savior.
It puts the law in its place, as you said.
And if people under the Old Testament, that's what Hebrews 11 talks about, right? They were looking forward towards. They were looking forward to a promise. Though they had not received it, they had faith that God would one day bring it. And that faith that God would one day save them because they were imperfect, though they tried to keep law, that type of faith is what saves. And now we have the promise, we have Jesus, and we have that same faith that though we're not looking forward to a promise, the promise has been
part
revealed.
of that community. Hebrews 11 gets into a fair bit of that kind of stuff, looking for something other than what they had at the moment, but would have one day, and the one day has come.
And that faith led them to serve God, not led them to sit back and go, well, I'm going to wait for a Savior. You know, when is he coming?
Yeah, come on. All right. I'm done.
All right, my turn. Now we're going to kind of switch. So he's kind of giving you his introduction, and he's going to explain some of this stuff as he goes. It's kind of like in John.
You got some explaining to do.
The first 18 verses of John, I believe, is really the foundation for the rest of the gospel, and he takes those pieces and he's going to explain it more. Now we're going to get into what is the problem going on in Rome. And the first problem is that Rome is filled with Gentiles. Why did they need Jesus in the first place? But it's also filled with Jews. Why did they need Jesus in the first place?
And it's really a capsule of how human beings operate when left to themselves. They go through certain stages of alienation from God.
Yeah. So for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth.
I like that. Well, it's a nasty thing, but it's true.
Yeah.
But look at our society. Truth is a commodity that's so foreign because of all the foolishness that's going on.
Yeah. And whenever, even as we're going to get into, there's so much that he explains later. I'm trying not to go too far. But even Romans 2, when he starts talking about this idea that people have a law within themselves, there's a moral aspect. Even though they didn't have the law of Moses, people know innately
they can't
right and
say,
wrong.
I didn't have any idea about right and wrong. I didn't think there was anything right to do. Everybody you talk to thinks something's right and something's wrong, and usually they have a pretty good core of understanding of what that is.
And whenever you sin, it is because you have suppressed some aspect of truth that you know, whether innately
you've
or
gone
revealed,
against yourself.
You've gone against something that you know to be true. Yeah. And everyone's done it, by the way.
Oh, yes.
Everybody's
all
done
the time.
For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. So here's, I think this gets both overplayed and underplayed at the same time. Overplayed in the sense of how much can people know about God from creation by itself.
And that's right, because there has to be some propositional revelation to go further beyond that. But there is that.
So, and I'm a firm believer that God had prophets outside of the Jewish nation, and we have evidence of it, who were out amongst the people, now not giving them the law of Moses, but going around saying, hey, you see everything that's around you?
Come on.
Who do you think made this? You believe in a wind god, you believe in a sun god, you believe in a water god. What about a God who made it all?
I mean, what about all these statues you make up them in idols? I mean, really, does that make sense? Paul does that.
Yeah.
Oh, Mars. I was reading a thing yesterday. It was a long, boring read, but I made myself do it, trying to explain consciousness from the brain by itself. Well, as I say sometimes, we can't even get a 5-day weather forecast right, but we can speak with great certainty on how evolution took something about that big, it exploded, and as a result of that, we're here doing this show. Really?
Hey,
really?
Where did the thing that big come
Well,
from?
that's another thing. So, I mean, if you want to talk about fanciful, far-reaching, doesn't begin to touch top, side, or bottom of everything, the cosmology that is based upon the Big Bang and evolution, man alive, it's got so much to have to try to cover, it can't even touch it.
Yeah. So, and but I do think this gets to overplayed in the sense of just because there is a awesome creation. Because, there are people who live in parts of the world that aren't as beautiful as East Tennessee. And so we look
Not
out.
New Zealand, mind you, but
We're
other places.
Yeah, we're sitting in the mountains and we see spectacular things. There is, like, even go over to the Middle East, there are places that are not comfortable to
Not
live.
your top choices. Yeah, no.
They're not comfortable to live. They had to work hard. They had to really. So they're looking out and going, man, this creation this is
out in the desert and all that stuff.
So I do think we take some of our perspectives of, we have the internet where we can search all the amazing places to live on the earth, but not everybody. Go to Africa. There are places in Africa. Man, you don't want to live there.
Well, the basic thing is, it testifies that we can't be here just because.
Yes.
And that, then what is the because?
Yes.
Because of what?
And I think this gets further explained in Romans 2, that there are Gentiles who have a sense of something, that they even keep law better than Jews, though they didn't have a law.
Yes.
And I think it comes back to this. There are people who did not fight against their, that natural tendency, though they weren't perfect.
Well, it goes all the way back to creation and after the flood. I mean, there's been a continuation of revelation that can be passed down in many ways, and I believe culture's got various pieces and parts of that that went along with their experiences. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that going over and burning your neighbor's house down is not a good thing to do.
No.
And people, God has made us in His image. And giraffes don't think about stuff like that, but humans do.
Yeah. All right, so I know we're already 30 minutes.
Oh man, but how the time is flying.
Yes. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through the rest, and what we're about to see, I want to give you some heads up, so when you're reading, you're looking for as we're reading.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
He's going to show, since you've allowed since you've given into there is no God, as we're about to see, or you worship the creature, and the further you get away,
here's what happens.
The further your conscience gets away from, there is an innate rightness.
Our culture's going through that right now.
Yes. Culture goes a certain way, and it will always go that way without God.
If we're animals, we act like animals. If we don't have a spiritual restraint, it doesn't take a prophet to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah. So that's what you're about to see. Okay. So verse 21. For although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. That's why I perceive, and I know I just said it when talk, that even the natural revelation has more to it than just nature itself. There were people out there who were telling them, they at least had some semblance, hey, there is a God who made all this.
Paul quotes a couple of folks on Mars Hill that had talked sense about the foolishness of idolatry.
Yeah, yep. All right, so claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. Because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever and amen. Paul has to throw a little praise in there, For this reason, God gave them up, so that gave them up again. So there's like this level that's being broken as they further get into sin. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. Everyone knows what that means. He's going to explain a little more. And men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passions for one another. And that one another is men to men, right? Men committing shameless acts with men, receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. So homosexuality, even accepted in a culture, is showing this natural tendency to go.
And one of the things about it is, and I've had debates with even family members at times, if we don't even deal with sin, let's just put this over there. Homosexuality is not natural. It's not Darwinian. It's not evolutionary. It's a dead end because the gene pool gets stopped. And so just from a very pragmatic point of view, secularist point of view, and it also really erodes the family and any number of things. And again, that doesn't mean that we're saying that if somebody has same-sex tendencies. They're going straight to hell. People have all kind of tendencies to do all kind of things that God doesn't want done.
Well, that's the point that we're about to see, is even those who were given into homosexuality and all these other sins, and the person who has the law who lies.
Yes.
Are all in need of
all in
Jesus.
the same bucket.
They're all in need of Jesus.
You know, rampant heterosexuality is wrong.
Yeah.
And dare we say, the yuckiest thing of all to me is pedophilia.
Yeah.
There are people who genuinely feel an attraction toward children. It's wrong.
Yeah. And we're going to see when you find your identity in Jesus and what he's done for you, a lot of this goes away.
Yes, it does.
A lot of it goes away.
You ask, what does he want?
Yeah.
What does he want me to be?
Yeah. So, all right. So, and likewise, men gave up relationships with women, were consumed with passion for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men, receiving in themselves a due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, and so there's another level. God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness. So I think he's about to list some things that are even worse than homosexuality.
Practically speaking, yes, they are.
Because they erode an entire evil, a manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips. Because really, homosexuality, now it does hurt people, but it's, you know, it's kind of like one of those, okay, two guys, two women, what harm? That's the thing.
What if they're going to treat you right? They're decent people, and they work hard, and they got a good work ethic, and all that. Now compare that to all these things here:
murderers,
slanderers,
people
boastful, inventors of evil. All that goes into a very pragmatic, practical level of men. Society's falling apart.
Yeah, because society is built upon the fact societies are built because any society that's ever been built is because people have come together to build it. And once it's established, it always seems like once it's established and they get to a certain point, they do everything the opposite of what it took to build it, and that's what tears it apart.
Imagine that. So if I'm a Christian, and I'm looking, and I say that I don't believe that homosexuality is what God intends and that, and don't acknowledge wickedness and greed and evil and murder and strife and deceit and malice, I'm a hypocrite.
Yep. You can't point one of these sins out.
No.
And leave the other ones out.
Exactly.
So and I want to extend that, even if you are someone who struggles with homosexuality, or someone who struggles with even gender dysphoria, the gospel has answers for you, and not in the sense of just changing you and
it's not like,
all of a sudden, but it gives you an identity that is found in Jesus that goes beyond how you feel about yourself. Because I'm going to tell you right now, even myself, who's not a homosexual or gender dysphoria, there are things that I think about myself that are unhealthy.
Oh, yes.
That Jesus helps me
helps
develop
you to deal with them.
and to become more like him and less like me. So, all right. There are gossips, slanders, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedience to parents.
Disobedient to parents? Did you say that?
Old Testament allows you to stone those people. Foolishness, faithless, heartless, and ruthless. And one of them, I think it's the heartless, is actually showing the natural affection.
Yeah, not having natural affection. One of the words for love that you naturally expect mothers to love their children. You naturally expect citizens with a benevolent ruler to love them. There are certain things that you just expect to be. When those things aren't present, it's saying that something's wrong.
Very much so. And though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. And so that's kind of what we're going to switch into a little bit, in the sense of these. I think chapter 2 begins with those who are not all that bad.
Yeah.
Who can't, like, I didn't go all of this way, but are you supporting?
Yeah.
Are you lifting up?
Yeah.
Are you exalting
Even though you
these
know,
things?
this really doesn't make a lot of sense. It really isn't something that's going to help society out. But hey, you know what? I'm going to promote it. Maybe it's a political reason in our case, in our country, that has so much politicalization that goes on, that people are willing to excuse all manner of things to get what they want politically.
So this shows you why the first part of Romans chapter 1 had to happen. Why Jesus had to come into the world, because look at what men do by themselves. This is what we become. And only Jesus, only the gospel.
And all of us fall into that category.
All of us, absolutely. So That is Romans chapter 1. I mean, there's just a lot. We're into 40 minutes.
Goodness.
But I think it's a necessary start.
Well, yeah, I give you a lot to look at this week with our readings to set the stage for what's coming later.
So, but share this message with others. And if you have questions, maybe you have some
Please
things that
ask them.
I still don't know this. I still can't understand this.
Yeah,
Ask
help me.
them.
Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes we can be wrong.
Yeah.
Help us if you feel like we are, and if we are, we would be happy to change.
Absolutely. So we love you.
Yes, we do.
And God bless.
Bye-bye.
Uh-oh, my mouse is not working.